So I'm gonna not so much share work that I've been doing, but share some questions, I think, and things I've been grappling with in my work. And so I can start by talking a little about what that work is. I'm from Kapuskasing, Ontario. I'm now in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, but I lived in Peterborough for a long time. And so, as I mentioned this morning, it's special to be here. I'm also someone who has lived experience of youth homelessness, who now works in homelessness and housing research. And so a lot of my work looks at how we can look at these systems using institutional ethnography and other ways of thinking, but also thinking through how experience lives in these spaces and how people with experience can be leading social change and how research can maybe or maybe not be a tool to do that. I went to Trent, where I did anthropology. So I was trained in traditional ethnography, and it was when I met Naomi, and Naomi was like, I do institutional ethnography, and I was like, yeah, I know what that is. And kind of transitioned into thinking through forms of research that might be more useful for doing the things I wanted to do. We talked about it a lot today, but a lot of my academic career has been in this crisis of like, who am I? Am I an activist? No. Am I a researcher? No. Am I someone with lived experience? Maybe. Am I like everything in different places all at once? Sure. And so a lot of the questions I'm going to ask today come from those different places. I also, when I was at Trent, I remember being in anthropology classes, and there was one class in particular where we were reading about dumpster diving, and I was like, I do that. But people were sitting there being like, whoa, the like symbolic, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, someone said, I think for my final project, I'm going to go dumpster diving. Jane, do you know where some good dumpsters are? And I was like, sure. Like, of course I'll share that knowledge. But I was sitting there thinking, there are pieces of the discussion that are happening that are not visible, that my lived experiences could bring into the mix. And so that started me thinking through research is something, but it's missing a lot of things when the people who are experiencing the social issues we're looking at aren't at the table, especially when academics are writing papers on behalf of communities. And so my work now really thinks of how can I best work for justice through research or other work for communities that I belong to and am a part of, but also communities that I don't belong to and I want to work in solidarity with, and how I can best use my access for that. And so a lot of the work that Naomi and I have done together looks at, can any approach be inherently activist, in that can it inherently aim to transform social structures that are unjust? And the answer I think we all have come to today is absolutely not. But they can be useful tools for thinking through justice work. And so when I was at the last anti-conference and Dorothy was here, I remember standing and saying, like, you wrote some of these pieces in years before I was born. We're all still working in these university spaces as researchers. Is it worth it? It's been decades. Is it worth salvaging? Is there something there that is important? I think, I'm sorry I missed the conversation this afternoon because it sounds like those were some questions that were coming up. And so in my first year of my PhD, I really played a lot with anarchism, which is something that I had encountered in my non-academic life, and really working with people either overtly anarchist or just like anarchist-y ways of being together in terms of like trying to foster non-hierarchical decision-making and spaces of mutual aid and taking care of each other and directly meeting our needs as we were struggling against state systems at different points in my life, and how that could bring in Dorothy's work to maybe try to focus on working within these systems that we know are unjust, so like the education system and across all these systems. And so this has been something I've been thinking of for quite a while. And so today, yeah, we can get t-shirts. Yeah, I'm t-shirts for everyone. So I wanted to talk about three things today, which is like compromises, conflicts, and community building in my work. And so this is a question I keep coming back to. Within anarchist thinking, a core value is that the means that we use have to be in lines with the ends we want to see. So a lot of research says, well, if we just study this, then we'll show this, and research is a means to an end. The way we do it is not actually that important, as long as we will reach this social goal or we'll get this policy changed, whatever. And in our work together in Montreal and in my work broadly, I've really tried to think through how we can avoid this. And we can see research itself as an action, not only finding just means to do research in community, but that research and the way we do research can be an action in itself and can have immediate impacts in our lives. And the other question is, Can we do anarchist research within structures that are inherently hierarchical? Can we do anarchist work within a university? And I mean, I was reading a lot of David Graeber, thinking through anthropology and the possibilities there. And this is still a question I come up against. And I think IE offers something really useful in terms of how we think of changing systems because of this desire to create alternate ways of doing research. I still don't know. I'm still at the university, so I'm not really sure. There was something else that I thought was, oh yeah, the ways that I talk about this now are also very different than the ways I was talking about this at our last anti-conference. And I wonder too, like Dorothy warns against this professionalization and institutionalization that happens, and the way that I talk to youth who are using shelters now is very different than I would have talked to them when I was a teenager, but also very different than when I started my PhD. And I think that there's something there around how there's always a danger when we're in these systems of like some subsumation into compromised spaces, which are always compromised. But then I also think too, research, I have hope for research for social change. I think what I was getting from the last conversation was like, actually it's really useful for me. When I was kicked out of school, when I was homeless, I was like, oh, well, I didn't show up, so it's my fault. And then when I started doing work, looking at the education system and the barriers that young people who are navigating homelessness face, I was like, this is clearly not individual young people's fault. And research gave me that. And theory also gave me ways of making sense of what was happening in my communities. But sometimes it's also just that I need to get paid. And I have some skills that allow me to function in academia. And so I think I've also worked with community researchers who are like, I love doing research, but I think also part of it is that they can access, maybe material resources through academic funds and the resources we have in universities to meet their needs. And so I think this is also a compromise that we need to pay attention to. Sometimes are we just showing up to the university because we also need a job and we want to access the money that they may or may not have, or they might be hiding, or they might just not be giving us. The other piece I've been thinking about in terms of using research, whether I think the conversations we were having today around like, can we do research on behalf of community? Can we do research as community? Regardless, I think that the ends that we have, there are still ends we want to see. They can often, we feel the need to fit them into something. And so I'm thinking of our work together, Naomi, of like, well, we didn't give the organization the report that they asked for because we didn't have the kind of data. And we did give them a report. It was just very long. And not what they asked for, which was just the process of the iterative work we were doing. But I think there is something about how we think research can be mobilized that is really narrow in how we imagine social change. And so again, it's often enumerating things like homelessness rather than thinking through how can we actually build new ways of learning together, being together, doing research together in community in our everyday lives. And so again, like this looks like people saying, well, this isn't feasible. And especially working with young people who are experiencing homelessness, I keep hearing like, well, youth don't know how it really is. And this came up with our project as well. Well, if you're going to pay them and they don't show up, then they're never going to learn how to go to a real job. And we decided as a team collectively that actually there are ways we can do things differently. Maybe they won't be everywhere, but they'll at least be within our work together. Thinking of a little bit about, I think it was April who was talking about this, love and care in work. Something else, so the research I'm doing right now with people who have lived experience of homelessness who are working in housing research or advocacy, so many people have said, like, I'm just exhausted and I can't heal while I'm taking care of everyone else, or I can't heal where I'm in these spaces that I'm constantly being invisibilized or having to fight for my right to be here. And so I've been in spaces that are very by us, for us, and there's just like combustion of spaces, there's conflict, there's harm being done, and sometimes I think it seems like, oh, well, we have to go to these other spaces where we might be one token person who's brought in this way, or we might, have a couple people, but we have to work within this very hierarchized structure. And I don't think that's the answer, but I think something I've been exploring is like, how do we actually structure and resource care in our work, and how can research be part of that? How can research spaces still maintain the kinds of healing and care that people need, and the timelines and the work that people need while doing something? Or maybe it's not research. Maybe we just need to heal together. And so this is something I've been paying attention to, which leads me to, I think, which is actually the value I try to bring into all of my work, which is community building. And so I see research as a tool for us to learn together about what's happening in our respective lives so that we can work together to change those things. And when I was thinking of imagination, the idea that like we don't have to take it for granted or see it as necessary that these systems must be unjust. That is just not the way it is, and that, you know, young people will grow up and learn that they just have to suck it up and get a job, or I don't know, whatever people say people have to do as adults. But that research can be ways to build direct action within our communities, so immediately meeting the needs of people in our research team, and not be seen as a means to an action down the road. And so we can see this in institutional ethnography maybe, but more participatory research or participatory action research, where it's like, I'm going to do an action, I'm going to talk to City Hall, which is important, perhaps, but isn't the only option. And so I see my research work as trying to build community so we can collectively decide what those actions should be. And then understanding through institutional ethnographic tools how that solidarity work happens. And so not only looking at institutions that people are navigating, also looking at those across institutions, but also like, how do we get into a room together and make sure everyone is well? What does that labor look like to make sure that everyone is coming into the space as well as they can, knowing we're all existing in spite of systems that are often trying to harm us? And so these aren't questions as much as like thinkings, but these are the things when I was thinking of our last institutional ethnography anti-conference that I realized I'm still very much struggling with. I don't think I'm as, like, I have a foot out the door of academia still, but I'm like, I'm here and I want to know, is it a useful space? Is it a space, like we're all here talking about it, is it a space where we can accept that things can be different? And then what does it look like to do that so that people aren't just like exhausted and harmed by it? And can IE be an important tool for that? I absolutely believe it can, but just not if we take it for granted that it will. Yeah, that's it.